Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Ahsan Academy, let me welcome you to a presentation on the gross anatomy of air. This presentation will include the general idea on the air, the gross anatomy of the air, as well as the function of each components of the air. At every stage, I will try to correlate it clinically. This is the organ of hearing as well as balance, and the part we see on the lateral aspects of the head is the outer part of the ear, and a canal leads into and form a complex organ into the temporal bone. Ear comprises of external ear. This is the external ear. It's labeled here, and middle ear is labeled here, and the internal ear that lies here inside the temporal bone. So external ear we can see from the outside is a part of the external ear. The canal shaped part of the external ear extends inside the bone, and the rest two parts, the middle is a cavity inside the petrous part, as well as the internal ear, a series of tubular cavities within the petrous part of the temporal bone. In the figure, you can see the different parts. It's shaded. This is light blue color shade showing the external ear extending into the petrous part of the temporal bone. You can see the red, this black arrow is showing the canal that is going inside and having the cartilaginous wall, and the red dotted mark showing the deeper part which have the bony wall. This lightly red shade indicates the position of middle ear cavity, and this is the white tube. The white dotted mark tube is the Eustachian tube that connects it with the middle ear with the nasopharynx. Now you'll get a shade of green. The light green shade area is the internal ear. This internal ear is connected to the brain by the nerves, which is indicated here by yellow dot arrow. The arrow is indicating the external ear. This part receives the sound wave. This arrow is indicating the middle ear, and this converts the received sound wave to a mechanical signals. This mechanical signal is converted into electrical impulses by the internal ear. The internal ear detect the motion and position of the body. The dotted black mark indicates the direction and pathway of the nerve. This is a very thin bone that separates this middle ear room from the cranial fossa. This is the middle cranial fossa. External ear comprises of auricle or pinna, that is outlined by the black dot line and shaded blue. This extends inside the head as a canal that is known as external acoustic meatus, and it is shown by the arrow here. Internally, this is separated from the middle ear by a membrane called the tympanic membrane. You can see that in the photograph as level 1. This is the auricle or pinna. Let us see the different parts of the auricle. I'll label each by each. This is a helix. This is anthelix. This is tragus, antitragus, and the space here is the concha. This soft area is the lobule, and external layer comprises of thin plate of elastic cartilage covered by skin. In the external ear, that is the auricle, has some muscles that is classified as extrinsic muscles and intrinsic muscle. These extrinsic muscles are anterior group of muscle, the superior group of muscles, and the inferior group of muscles. These are voluntary muscles, and we can use it to move the auricle. Intrinsic muscles lies within the auricle area, and these are the small muscles shown in the figure below. All the muscles are supplied by the facial nerve. Cutaneous supply of the ear. You see, trigeminal nerve has 3 branches. This is the area supplying the ophthalmic branch. This area is supplied by the maxillary nerve, and behind this is the mandibular nerve. This mandibular nerve extends up to the anterior part of the auricle, and this posterior part of the auricle and most of the area is supplied by the auriculotemporal lesser occipital nerve from the cervical plexus. Here the root value is second and third cervical ventral rami. Innermost part of the external acoustic meatus and over the tympanic membrane area is supplied by the vagus, and this area has some clinical significance. External acoustic meatus is about 1 inch long, and it is not straight. The wall has cartilaginous part and the bony part. The outer 1/3 is cartilaginous wall, and the inner 2/3 is having bony wall, and inside this canal is lined by the skin over a soft connective tissue. The skin of the external ear, the outer third is hairy and contains many sebaceous as well as ceruminous glands. The ceruminous glands are the modified sweat glands. They produce some sticky secretions. These secretions is yellowish color, and we used to name those as wax. You can see this here, and this wax together prevents the entry of bad elements, including the dust and living insects. That's why known as sticky barrier to the external acoustic meatus. External acoustic meatus is not straight. It is a bit sinus. It can be made straight because the outer part of this have cartilaginous wall that is elastic in nature, and it is flexible. Shape can be changed by straightening, pulling the external auricle superiorly, posteriorly, and slightly lateral. This makes the external acoustic meatus straight. That's why to examine the tympanic membrane, doctor used to pull the external auricles superiorly, posteriorly, and slightly laterally, so that the canal becomes straight and doctor can easily examine the outer surface of the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane It's an oval structure. It's a membrane lying it slopes medially, and its outer surface faces inferiorly and slightly anteriorly. The handle of malleus is a small ossicle, is a bone and very small, that's why it is known as ossicle. And this is named as the malleus, and the handle of the malleus is a part of that bone, and it remains fused to the upper part of the tympanic membrane. From the outer surface, from the outside, we can examine this outer surface of the tympanic membrane. So let us see different parts of this tympanic membrane outer surface. This is the tympanic cavity, you can see, and this is the outer surface, and this is the handle of the malleus, can be seen from the outer part. It is actually fixed on the inner side of the membrane. These two membranous folds extends from the upper part of the handle of the malleus to either direction, and these are known as malleolar fold. And this malleolar fold separates the upper part. This is a bit flaccid part known as pars flaccida, and larger part which is relatively thick and tense, this is known as pars tensa. So these two parts are separated by the two folds, anterior malleolar fold and posterior malleolar folds. A bright reflectile area which is pyramidal in shape is known as cone of ray, that is directed anterior-inferiorly. It's a bright reflection of the light. You see, because of observing of this direction, we can identify the side of the tympanic membrane. Like this patient is seen, this is the right tympanic membrane. So look at the cone of light. This is directed towards the right. So if we see the direction of the cone of light, we can say the side of the tympanic membrane. This is from the right side. Now these tympanic membranes, you look at the light ray. This is cone of light. It is indicated by LR on either as a diagram. So this is directed towards the left. So you should remember that it is directed anterior-inferiorly. This patient should be like this. So this is the diagram of left tympanic membrane. You can remember the right one is I have shown on the left side a small tympanic membrane. So observing the cone of ray, we can say the tympanic membrane of which side. Tympanic membrane comprises of three layers. From outside inward, the skin is outside layer, and inside there is mucosa of the middle layer. You can see the total section of the ear, and black ear showing the outer side and bluish arrow is showing the inner side. So in between this intermediate part is connective tissue, and it's a very thinner than the outer and the inner layers. The peripheral part is fibrocartilaginous ring. You can see the photographs on the right side. This peripheral part is fibrocartilaginous ring, and it attaches the tympanic membranous part to the temporal bone. Outer skin is supplied by the auriculotemporal nerve and vagus nerve. The inner mucosal part is supplied by the glossopharyngeal, this nerve. This is the ninth cranial nerve. Which tympanic membrane? Easily you can see the cone of ray. So this is erected left anteriorly, so it is left tympanic membrane. This is also from left tympanic membrane. The person is observed. This one's ray is directed to the right. So this is of tympanic membrane of right ear. This is the middle ear I am showing. The temporal bone is shown here, the skull, and it is reddish in color. So let us see which one is the middle ear cavity. The green arrow in the right upper figure is showing the middle ear cavity, and it is an air-filled mucous membrane lined space in the temporal bone. It's a narrow and oblique cavity. You can see the direction of the long axis of the cavity. It is parallel to the tympanic membrane. This is the middle ear cavity, you can see, and you can see the tympanic membrane. The upper level of the tympanic membrane is visible, and let me draw a horizontal line. So part above this line is known as epitympanic recess. Means epi means above, recess means a hidden space. Epitympanic recess remains a bit above the tympanic membrane level, and this is the true tympanic cavity or tympanic cavity proper. This tympanic cavity has 4 walls: roof, floor, lateral wall, and medial wall. How these are formed, let me discuss. This is the tapement tympani that forms the roof. It is a thin plate of bone that is present in the petrous part of the temporal bone. You can see on the left side the black arrow is showing the tegment tympani, and it is in the floor of middle cranial fossa. This is a thin plate and clinically significant because this middle ear often affected by infection, and this, if it can erode, even tumor can occur. Some sorts of eroding tumors appear in the middle ear, and that can erode this thin plate of bone and can enter into the cranial cavity, affecting the meninges first and then brain. The floor, you can see, is also thin plate of bone that's having very close relation with a vein you can see below. Let us try to understand this. This is the sigmoid sinus. Let me show it again. This arrow, this line is showing the course of the sigmoid sinus that is going towards the jugular foramen, and this passes through the jugular foramen to form the internal jugular vein. Here, this internal jugular vein is a bit dilated and form the bulb. This bulb causes an impression in the bone at the floor of the tympanic cavity. So the plate of bone becomes very thin. So if this thin plate of bone is eroded by that sorts of clinical conditions, that will go inside the vein and can cause severe hemorrhage. Tympanic membrane forms the lateral wall, and the medial wall separates it from the internal ear, and this is known as labyrinthine wall. So we got the 4 walls here: the roof, floor, lateral wall, and the medial wall. This is anterior wall is very thin, and some structure opens into it. Let us see that. The anterior wall of the tympanic cavity means middle ear cavity. 2 important structures open into it. One is the auditory tube, it opens in the lower part. This is pharyngotympanic tube. This is eustachian tube. All are in the name of single tube that connects the middle layer with the nasopharynx. I'm showing the arrow. The second arrow is showing the position of the nasopharynx, and you can see the lateral one, and arrowhead is very close to the opening of the eustachian tube or auditory tube or pharyngotympanic tube. This connects the nasal cavity and through that to the atmosphere. So atmospheric air can get inside the middle ear cavity, and air from the middle ear cavity can come out through this tube. The second tube opens that contains a muscle. This is tensor tympani muscle. You can see in the figure the tensor tympani muscle is coming out and the tendon is inserted. Posterior wall is also very narrow, but its importance is that it is through this it is connected to the middle ear cavity, is connected to the cavity present in the mastoid part of the temporal bone. This is known as mastoid antrum, and this mastoid antrum is connected to numerous small rooms which are the air cells present in the mastoid part of the temporal bone. So this is connected through the hiatus. The middle layer contains different structures. You can see the arrow is indicating the tympanic membrane, and on the right side the white arrow indicates the position of internal ear and the wall that separates it from the middle ear cavity. So if I take the tympanic membrane away, then we can see the middle ear and its content. The medial wall is visible on the right lower figure. This is shown in a section level, so you can see the eardrum from the inner wall. So medial wall is removed from the left figure and lateral wall is removed from the right figure. So the handle of the lamellus on the left side is attached to the tympanic membrane, and inner surface of the tympanic membrane is visible on the left figure. You can easily see the muscle coming and inserted into the handle of the malleus, and below that you can see the auditory tube is opening into the anterior wall. So let us identify the contents present inside the middle ear in this figure. So it contains the ossicles. 3 ossicles are there. This is malleus, so you can identify it into the right figure. This is incus, and the last one is the steps. So 3 ossicles are there. Now muscles, 2 muscles. This is tensor tympani muscle, and another muscle, a very small, totally within the cavity. You see, this is the stapedius muscle. So the tensor tympani, the tendon gets inside, and most of the part remains within a canal of the temporal bone and inserted into handle of malleus. The steps remains within the temporal bone. The bulk is coming out and is attached to the steps. This gold rounded area is known as this foot process of the steps, and this is attached to the body of the steps above. It is one nerve passes through it. This is the chorda tympani nerve. It is just under the mucosa. It travels through the cavity, and you can see this is passing lateral to the incus and medial to the malleus muscle. In between, this is passing. So this is very much exposed to the cavity. And lastly, this cavity is filled with air. So any problem that fluid can get in and can fill this gap in clinical conditions. Pus can get in and can fill this cavity and can affect these contents, including the chorda tympani nerve. This chorda tympani nerve is carrying the taste sensation. So, in some cases, because of the ear infection, anterior two-thirds of the tongue of that side loses the taste sensation. Communication of the middle ear cavity. Already here I have labeled the nasopharynx, you can see, and we have discussed that one tube that is known as pharyngotympanic tube or auditory tube or eustachian tube, all the same, opens into the nasopharynx lateral wall, and it starts from the middle ear cavity, lower part of the anterior wall. Here I have shown by the arrow the total path. Black arrow is showing that. Mastoid antrum, you see the arrow is showing the additus to antrum, and through that the epitympanic recess is connected to a large cavity in the mastoid part, and this is known as mastoid antrum. And this mastoid antrum has connection with the mastoid ear cells. So this is an important area clinically, especially important because any infection or pus collection in the middle ear can go and take its position in the epitympanic recess, and if the amount is increased, the pus can go into the mastoid antrum through the adductus and can occupy the positions in the ear cells. So that becomes difficult to clean it up for the doctors. This one is mastoid process. You can see the mastoid ear cells and a large cavity. This is the mastoid antrum. You can see all these in the figure, and these are the ear cells, and the black arrow with both ends showing the arrowhead. This part is the adductus, means the gateway to the mastoid antrum from the epitympanic recess. The arrow is indicating the sound wave strikes the eardrum, means tympanic membrane. So there will be a vibration in the tympanic membrane. That vibration is transmitted by the handle of the malleus, and this malleus makes a synovial joint with the incus, and the incus make synovial joints with the steps, so all will move like the wheel of railway, and ultimately the food process of the incus goes inside, so it pushes and creates a wave in the fluid present in the internal ear. So whenever this food process gets in, another thin membrane is there in another window, and that bulges inside the middle ear cavity. So there will be a conversion of sound wave to a mechanical wave that creates a fluid wave in the internal ear. So this conversion of the sound wave to a mechanical signal is the job of the middle ear cavity, and this is transmitted to the internal ear. So this middle ear cavity converts the sound wave into a mechanical signal, and that signal is transmitted to the internal ear. Now let us see the internal ear. The internal ear consists of a very complicated bony labyrinth and membranous labyrinth. These are present in the petrous part of the temporal bone. This labyrinth means, this terminology means a complicated irregular network of passages. If it is formed by the bone, it is bony labyrinth. If it is formed by the membrane, membrane means epithelium on connective tissue, then it is membranous labyrinth. So this terminology, I think, is clear. In either cases, it is a complicated labyrinth, means complicated pathway. So let us discuss the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. You see, this is the internal air indicated by the arrow. It is internal to the mid-layer cavity. Already we have discussed in detail. So you can see this is the bony labyrinth above. If we make a section, the membranous labyrinth will be exposed, and if we remove the membranous labyrinth, this is the inside of the bony labyrinth, and now membranous labyrinth is separated from it. So easily you can imagine the above figure is the tunnel inside the bone is very complicated pathway, and the membranous labyrinth present inside is another pathway that has lumen and is also complicated one. So this one is the bony labyrinth and this is membranous labyrinth. I think the conception is clear. So this is the bony labyrinth, and the bony labyrinth comprises of three tubular structures. These are known as semicircular canal, and this is connected to a large room. This is known as vestibule of the bony labyrinth, and a snail-like circular tubular structure. This is cochlea. You can see inside the tubes, how does it look like? How does the semicircular canal look like? Vestibule and the cochlea. So inside there is periosteum that lines the inner side of the bony labyrinth, and inside that a tube is there immersed inside a fluid. So how does it look like? If we take a section, a square area is there inside fluid. Inside that fluid, there fluid containing tube is there. Now let us increase the size of the tube. So the outer fluid layer is now has become thin. It is separated from an outer coat. So now you can get a conception that outermost layer is the periosteum of the bone. Inside that, this bluish stained area is the perilimb, and a tube is membranous labyrinth. Inside the tube is endolymph. So the conception is clear now that outer bone is covered by the periosteum. Inside that, perilimb is situated. Within the perilimb, most of the space is occupied by the membranous labyrinth containing endolymph. So already we have discussed the semicircular canal, vestibule and cochlea. Now this contains membranous labyrinth. So within this you can see this membranous labyrinth is not having the same structural orientation in every area. This is semicircular area. Semicircular canal contains the semicircular duct. This is the membranous labyrinth, and cochlea contains cochlear duct, but the vestibules contain utricle and another is saccule, and they are connected by a tube known as vestibular aqueduct. So this tube is having a small sac outside the bone area. This is succus and ductus endolymphaticus. So outside the duct, the area is filled with fluid that is known as perilymph. Within the canal system, duct system, there is fluid. This is endolymph. So you can diagrammatically have shown the pathway of receptions that is, the large arrow on the left side is showing the sound wave striking the tympanic membrane that creates a movement in the ossicle, and that is passing attached to the perilymph and creates a wave in the perilymph that circulates and pushes another window covered by a membrane. So there are two windows between the middle layer and internal layer in the medial wall of the tympanic cavity. This is fenestra vestibuli close to the base of the stairs. You can see the yellow arrow in the middle figure, and fenestra cochleae. You can see this blue figure on the right, bony labyrinth. So in the bony labyrinth, if you see, the red is indicating the fenestra vestibuli. It is closed by the foot process of the steps, and the secondary tympanic membrane covers another opening. This is fenestra cochleae, and it is closed by a membrane. This is known as secondary tympanic membrane. So any mechanical movement that passes through the mid layer creates a wave in the perilymph that causes a movement in the wall of the membranous labyrinth, and naturally a wave in the endolymph. The ear has two functions, hearing and balance. So let us start with the auditory function, means hearing functions. If you see, this is the cross section of cochlea. So cochlear duct is there, and this is the arrow is indicating an enlarged figure. This is the endolymph area. In the wall of the duct there are series of cells. These are the receptor cells. These small organs are known as organ of Corti, that is present in the wall of the membranous labyrinth. This part of the membranous labyrinth is a cochlear duct. So cochlear duct has this receptor in a linear fashion. This spiral organ of Corti contains hair cells. You can see the hair cells, and these hair cells have some elongated apical microvilli-like structure, which is longer stereocilium, and with the wave created in the perilymph and endolymph, these create a movement in these processes that is received by the receptor nerves that is making cup-shaped ending. You can see in the right lower figure, the yellow cup is the receptor cells. So all these receptor cells takes these mechanical signals and convert it to a nerve impulse. So this spiral ganglia, this impulse pass to the cell body present in the wall of the bony labyrinth, and this is the spiral ganglia. Cell bodies are present in the spiral ganglion. So the central process, this is the spiral ganglion. Central process makes the cochlear nerve, and this cochlear nerve goes to the brain and person. This is summarizing the total hearing system. If you start from the upper left figure, the sound wave is coming and it is converted into mechanical wave. These ossicles, three ossicles, converts it to a mechanical form and creates an wave in the perilymph. The perilymph is circulating, and this wave is completed by pushing the secondary tympanic membrane inside the tympanic cavity. So this wave passes over the membranous labyrinth and creates a wave in the endolymph and in the wall of the membranous labyrinth cochlea. So this cochlear wall contains organ of Corti that contains a hair cell. Hair cells has some sensory processes. So that movement in the sensory processes creates a signal in the receptor cells, receptor nerve endings present with the hair cells. So all these signals are carried to the spiral ganglion and the cell body is there. So sensory impulses is reprocessed and finally central process carry through the cochlear part of the vestibulocochlear nerve to the brain so that we can hear. Vestibular sensations means balance. You can remember the three parts of the bony labyrinth. So within the semicircular canal there is semicircular ducts, that is the membranous labyrinth, and in the vestibule there is utricle, saccule and vestibular aqueduct. I am using one diagram to understand the vestibular receptions. You can see the semicircular duct and inside is wall. The dilated part of the semicircular canal as well as this opening into the utricle. So utricular wall contains macula that I have made a red circular. These macula are specialized area that contains the receptors. These dilated parts of the semicircular canal contains cristae. These are also an elevation in its wall that also contains receptor cells. These are the hair cells too. There are two types of hair cell for the vestibular receptions. This type 1 and type 2. I have made a circular red line. So you can see this type 1 is a bit flask shaped and type 2 is columnar shaped. The yellow curve is indicating this is the ending of the nerve. Nerve fiber ends at the base of the cell. So whenever there is any change of position of the head, there will be a movement in the hair cell stereocilia. So this mechanical stimulation is converted into nerve impulse by the receptor nerve endings. So this will identify the positions of the head in the ear. So they will initiate an impulse. So impulse from this membranous labyrinth will come out and they will form a nerve, that is the vestibular part of the vestibulocochlear nerve. So this way the vestibular impulse is initiated in the hair cell, transmitted to the receptor part of the peripheral process of the nerve neurons, and they combine together. The central process makes the vestibular part of the vestibulocochlear nerve, and that coming out and passing with the facial nerve through the facial canal. And you see this is the position in the petrous part of the temporal bone. So the canal is opening into the posterior canal fossa, and finally the nerve goes to the brain to identify the impulse initiated by the receptors. Thank you very much for remaining with this presentation.